He hadn't planned on going to the wedding. He hadn't planned on sitting at table 9, the one shoved near the exit doors where the AC unit rattled every 40 seconds. He hadn't planned on the seating chart falling apart at the last minute, or on ending up next to someone whose laugh he recognized before he even turned to look at her face. He definitely hadn't planned on Emma Carter, and he sure as hell hadn't planned on the way his chest tightened when she smiled at him like no time had passed at all, like 7 years was nothing. But here's what nobody tells you about second chances. They don't announce themselves. They just show up at table 9 wearing a blue dress and laughing too loud at someone else's joke, and you realize in about 30 seconds that your whole carefully organized life is about to get very complicated. If this story is already pulling at something in your chest, hit like, drop a comment, and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The invitation had been sitting on Nathan Walker's kitchen counter for 11 days before he finally responded to it. Not because he was disorganized. Nathan was the opposite of disorganized. He was the kind of person who kept a whiteboard calendar on the refrigerator, who packed his daughter's school bag the night before, who knew exactly which Tuesday of every month the trash collectors came. Organization was the thing that held his life together, the scaffolding he'd built around himself after everything else had fallen apart. He just hadn't been sure he wanted to go. Kevin and Lindsay's wedding was a neighborhood event in every sense of the phrase. Kevin Marsh had lived 4 houses down on Crescent Drive since before Nathan moved in. Lindsay Holt, Lindsay Marsh now, had grown up 2 streets over and used to babysit half the kids in the area in her teens. Everyone on the block was invited. Everyone on the block was going. To skip it would have required either a funeral or a convincing lie, and Nathan was bad at lying, so he RSVP'd yes. 1 adult plus 1 child age 6 named Lily. Lily Walker had strong opinions about the dress she was going to wear. "The yellow one," she said for the 4th time that Saturday morning, standing in the doorway of her bedroom in her pajamas while Nathan tried to iron his one decent dress shirt on the bathroom counter. "The yellow one is at Grandma's," he said. "Then we should go get it. Grandma's is 40 minutes away." Lily considered this with the gravity of someone making a major diplomatic decision. She was 6, but she had always carried herself like she was running a small country. "Then the pink one," she said finally, like she was doing him a favor. "Thank you," Nathan said. He burned the inside of his wrist on the iron. "God!" He stopped himself. "Fudge." Lily watched him shake out his hand. "You said a bad word." "I said fudge." "Your face said a bad word." He couldn't argue with that. They arrived at the wedding venue, a converted farmhouse about 3 miles outside the neighborhood, the kind of place with string lights and a barn door and a field that smelled like cut grass and wood smoke. 20 minutes after the ceremony started. Nathan had intended to be early. Lily had lost 1 shoe somewhere between the front door and the car, and locating it had cost them the better part of 15 minutes. The ceremony was still going when they slipped in through a side door and found seats in the back row. Lily immediately climbed into his lap, even though she was 6 and technically too old for that, and he let her because she smelled like strawberry shampoo, and sometimes he needed that more than she did. He watched Kevin and Lindsay stand up at the front of the room, holding hands and looking terrified in the best possible way, and he felt something complicated move through him. Not jealousy exactly, not sadness exactly, something quieter. The kind of feeling that had no clean name. He'd been to exactly 1 wedding since his divorce. This was his 2nd. His ex-wife, Dana, had remarried 8 months ago. He'd heard about it through a mutual friend, not from Dana directly, which was probably how it needed to be. They weren't cruel to each other, they just weren't anything to each other anymore, which was in some ways harder. She'd moved to Portland with her new husband. Lily spent 3 weeks there every summer. Nathan spent those 3 weeks cleaning out closets and reorganizing the garage and pretending he wasn't rattling around the house like a marble in a shoebox. The ceremony ended. People clapped. Kevin kissed Lindsay and somebody in the front row whooped too loud. And Lily asked Nathan what kissing tasted like, and he said something incoherent about it depending on who you were kissing, and she looked at him like he'd given an unsatisfactory answer, which he had. They filtered out to the reception hall, the barn, retrofitted with round tables and Edison bulbs and a bar along the far wall. Nathan found the seating chart on an easel near the entrance. He scanned it twice before he found his name. Table 9. He located table 9. It was positioned near the back of the room, within range of an air conditioning unit mounted on the wall that was already running too hard and making a sound like a cat stuck in a dryer. 2 of the 8 seats at the table were already occupied. A couple he recognized vaguely as neighbors from the far end of the block, the ones with the aggressive golden retriever. They smiled at him with that particular expression people reserve for single fathers, which was somewhere between admiration and pity and mild discomfort. And he smiled back and settled Lily into a chair and told her not to put her hands in the centerpiece candle. "I wasn't going to," Lily said, moving her hand away from the centerpiece candle. More guests trickled in. The table filled. Nathan made small talk with the golden retriever couple. Their names were Brad and Susan, and they'd just had their kitchen redone, apparently, because they mentioned it 3 times in 6 minutes. And he kept Lily occupied with the breadbasket and a series of increasingly elaborate games involving the folded napkins. He didn't notice the empty chair to his left until someone pulled it out. Sorry. The seating chart was a disaster. She moved half of us around at the last minute. I was supposed to be at table 3, and now apparently I'm..." The woman dropped into the seat, set a small clutch purse on the table, and pushed her hair back from her face. Then she looked up. Nathan looked at her. She looked at Nathan. There were a few seconds where neither of them said anything, which was unusual for Emma Carter because Emma Carter had never in her life struggled to find something to say. Nathan. Not a question. Not quite a statement. Something in between, the kind of word that comes out when your brain is still processing what your eyes are seeing. Emma. His voice came out steadier than he felt. Hey. She laughed, a small, short, disbelieving sound. What? How? She stopped. Started again. You live here? In this neighborhood? For about 3 years now. You? I moved back 6 months ago. She shook her head slowly. 6 months ago, and somehow, it's a big neighborhood. It's not that big. No, he admitted. It's not. She looked different and exactly the same, which was the most disorienting thing about it. Her hair was shorter than he remembered. It used to fall past her shoulders, and now it sat just below her jaw in a way that suited her better. There were fine lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there 7 years ago. But her eyes themselves were the same dark brown they'd always been, and the way she tilted her head slightly when she was trying to work something out, that hadn't changed at all. He'd known Emma Carter for most of his childhood. They'd been best friends from the age of 9 through 23, which was the kind of friendship that doesn't translate well into adult conversation because people always assumed there had to be more to it, and he'd spent years explaining that no, it wasn't like that. They were just friends, genuinely just friends, and he'd believed that mostly. Then she'd moved to Chicago for a job. He'd gotten married. Life had done what life does. 7 years. "This is Lily," he said, because Lily was staring at Emma with open, unguarded curiosity, the way only small children can stare at strangers. Emma turned to her immediately. "Hi, Lily." "Hi." Lily studied her. "You know my dad?" "We grew up together. I've known him since he was about twice your age." Lily absorbed this. "Was he weird?" Emma pressed her lips together. Her eyes cut briefly to Nathan. "Sometimes," she said diplomatically. "He's still weird," Lily informed her. "I'm right here," Nathan said. Emma laughed. A real one this time, the full-length version, the one he recognized. And Nathan felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't even realized was clenched. The dinner service was slow, which meant they had time to talk. They did the recap version first, the surface-level exchange that people do when they're trying to cover years of life in 30 minutes. Emma had moved to Chicago after college, worked for an urban planning consultancy, done well, moved around some. She'd come back to the area 6 months ago for reasons she was slightly vague about, picked up contract work with a smaller firm, rented a house on Brentwood Lane, which Nathan realized with some amazement was only about 4 blocks from his place on Crescent Drive. Nathan gave her the abbreviated version of his own last 7 years. The marriage to Dana, which had started with genuine love and ended with 2 people slowly realizing they wanted different things in a way neither of them had been able to say out loud until it was too late. The divorce 2 years ago. The sole custody arrangement that had followed, which had been less contested than it might have been because Dana had taken the Portland job, and both of them knew, without saying it, that Lily's life was here. Emma listened to all of this with the kind of attention that felt different from politeness. She didn't fill the silences with empty reassurances. She didn't say "I'm so sorry" in the reflexive way people did when divorce came up, the way that was really about managing their own discomfort. She just listened, and when he finished, she said, "How are you actually doing with it?" Not the party line answer. He looked at her. "It's hard sometimes. It's also fine. Both of those things are true at the same time." That sounds like an honest answer. "I've had 2 years to workshop it." She smiled at that, and it was the smile he remembered, slightly crooked on the left side, like she was deciding at the last second how much warmth to let out. Lily, who had been coloring on the back of her place card with a pen she'd found somewhere, looked up and announced that she was hungry and the bread was gone. "They're bringing dinner," Nathan said. "When?" "Soon." "How soon is soon?" "Sooner if you stop asking," Lily sighed. She turned to Emma. "He always says that." Emma rested her chin on her hand and regarded Lily with great seriousness. "That's very frustrating. Do you have a backup plan?" Lily considered this. "I could eat the flower," she said, pointing at the centerpiece. "That's a fake flower," Nathan said. "You don't know that." "I do actually know that." Emma reached into her clutch, produced a slightly squashed granola bar, and set it on the table in front of Lily. Lily looked at it, looked at Emma, looked at Nathan as if to say, "This is the kind of preparation that is required." "Thank you," Lily said, with more genuine gratitude than she'd expressed about anything Nathan had done all day. "I always carry one," Emma said. "Old habit." She didn't explain the habit, and Nathan didn't ask, but he filed it away. The small fact that Emma Carter came prepared for small emergencies, that she carried contingencies in her purse. Some things, apparently, didn't change. Dinner came and went. The toasts happened. Kevin's best man went 3 minutes too long and made a joke about fantasy football that landed for about 4 people. And Lindsay's maid of honor cried in a way that was clearly genuine and made half the room tear up anyway. The cake was cut. The first dance unspooled in the center of the room to a song Nathan didn't recognize, something slow and acoustic, while the overhead lights dimmed and everybody watched Kevin and Lindsay move together in that particular way that newly married people move. Still a little cautious, still figuring out the weight of what they'd just agreed to. Nathan watched from table 9 and felt the uncomplicated version of the feeling from earlier, the one he could actually name this time. He was glad for them, that was all. Just genuinely glad. Emma was watching too, her elbow on the table, her chin in her palm. In the dim light, her profile looked like a photograph. "They look happy," she said. "They are," Nathan said. "Kevin's been talking about marrying her since 2019. He knew that long ago? Some people just know." She turned to look at him, something shifting in her expression, though he couldn't read it in the light. She turned back to the dance floor before he could. The music transitioned to something with a beat. Tables started emptying as guests drifted toward the floor. Lily, who had been dangerously close to falling asleep on Nathan's shoulder, perked up immediately when she heard the tempo change and looked at him with enormous eyes. "Can I dance?" "Sure." "With you?" "I'll be there in a minute. Go." She scrambled off her chair and ran toward the floor with the total physical recklessness of someone who hadn't yet learned to be embarrassed by their own body. And Nathan watched her go with the particular kind of love that has no vocabulary for itself. "She's great," Emma said. There was nothing performative about it. "She has her moments," he said. "She has good taste. She picked you." He looked at Emma. "She didn't pick me. I'm what she got." "Kids don't love you because they have to," Emma said simply. "They love you because of who you are." She looked at you like, I don't know, like you're the safest place she knows. He didn't have anything to say to that. He just sat with it. A minute later, the bride's mother materialized at their table like weather. She was a formidable woman named Patricia, who had the energy of someone who had been planning this wedding for 4 years and was going to extract every possible unit of joy from every person in attendance before the evening ended. "You two are sitting," she said, as if she'd caught them doing something illegal. "We're talking," Nathan offered. "You can talk on the dance floor. Up, up." Everybody dances. That's the rule tonight. Kevin and Lindsay want a full floor. She was already moving to the next table, pressing people into motion like a sheepdog with excellent organizational skills. Nathan looked at Emma. Emma was already standing, brushing off her dress, looking at him with a slightly resigned but not entirely unhappy expression. I can tell her where, he started. You'll dance with me, Nathan Walker, Emma said, and you'll stop making it weird. I wasn't making it weird. Your face was making it weird. He stood up. That. The song was something slow. Not the first dance song. Not quite, but close. The kind of tempo that required actual proximity, which Nathan was acutely aware of as they navigated their way to the edge of the dance floor. He wasn't a bad dancer. He wasn't a good one either. He was a functional dancer. Someone who could keep time and not step on feet and get through a slow song without incident. He placed one hand at Emma's waist, and she took his other hand, and they found the rhythm without much discussion. It was not immediately strange. It was strange about 12 seconds in, when he realized that her hand felt the same as it had the last time they'd danced, which had been a college party, junior year, an overcrowded kitchen with somebody's playlist bleeding out of a Bluetooth speaker, both of them a little drunk and not thinking anything of it. He could still picture the kitchen. He hadn't thought about that kitchen in years. You got better, she said. At what? Dancing. Oh, I wasn't bad before. You were a little bad before. That's a subjective assessment. I was the one getting my feet stepped on. I'm the objective party. He looked down at her. She was looking up at him with that familiar expression, the one that was humor and challenge in equal measure, the one that had always made him feel like he was in a conversation worth having. Fair point, he said. They danced. Around them, the floor had filled up. Couples and groups and solo guests who'd given in to Patricia's hurting, the whole collective warmth of an evening that had been good and was getting better. Nathan could see Lily somewhere to his left, dancing with what appeared to be complete artistic freedom and zero concern for anyone else's personal space. And he tracked her with the passive background attention that parenting had hardwired into him, the way you can hold one conversation while keeping one eye permanently on the horizon. But mostly, he was here, on this specific patch of dance floor, in this specific light, with Emma Carter's hand in his and the familiar strange smell of her perfume and 7 years of absence sitting between them like a third person he didn't know how to introduce. I thought about calling you, he said. He hadn't intended to say it. It came out anyway. She looked at him. When? After Dana and I split. Not right away. A few months in. He paused. I don't know why I didn't. I thought about calling you too, she said after a moment. When I moved back. Why didn't you? She was quiet for a couple of seconds, which was unusual for Emma. She was a person who talked through things in real time, who processed aloud. Silence from her meant she was being careful about something. I didn't know what we still were to each other, she said finally. After all that time, I didn't want to find out we were strangers. He thought about that. Are we? She looked at him. Around them, the song shifted slightly, the kind of seamless DJ transition that keeps the floor moving, and she didn't move away from him and he didn't move away from her. No, she said, we're not. Something settled. Not dramatically, not in the way things settle in movies, just quietly, like a door closing gently in a room where the wind had been coming through. They finished the song. By 9:30, Lily had run herself completely out of energy and was draped across 2 chairs with her pink dress pulled around her like a deflated parachute, dead asleep with her mouth slightly open. Nathan sat beside her with his jacket over her shoulders, nursing a glass of water because he was driving, watching the party continue around him. Emma came back from the bar and settled into the chair across from him with a glass of red wine and the comfortable ease of someone who didn't feel the need to fill silence. She out? Emma asked, nodding at Lily. Completely. She fought hard. The granola bar gave her extra endurance. Emma smiled. She swirled the wine in her glass and looked at the dance floor, then back at him. Tell me something I don't know about you, she said. Something that happened in the last 7 years. He thought about it honestly. I learned to cook. Like actually cook, not just pasta and eggs. Lily's weirdly adventurous about food for a 6-year-old, so I had to keep up. What can you make? Chicken tikka masala. Decent ramen from scratch. This mushroom risotto that takes about 40 minutes, and I always say I won't make it, and then she asks for it, and I always do. Emma was watching him with a soft expression he didn't entirely know what to do with. Of course you learned to cook for her, she said, not quite to him. What does that mean? Nothing bad. She shook her head slightly. Just, that tracks. That's very you. He wanted to ask what version of him she was referencing, the 23-year-old she'd last known, or some projected idea of who he might have become. He didn't ask. The answer was somewhere in the evening, and he wasn't ready to hold it directly. Your turn, he said. Something I don't know. She thought for a moment. I took up running 3 years ago. I hated it for about 8 months, and then one day it just clicked, and now I can't not do it. She paused. And I have a cat named Gerald. Gerald. He was named when I got him from the shelter. It seemed cruel to change it. What's Gerald like? Deeply judgmental. Not affectionate on any terms except his own. Knocks things off surfaces for no reason. She considered. I love him unreasonably. Nathan laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that came from somewhere real, not the social kind. I missed you, he said, and this time he knew he was saying it. It wasn't an accident. It came out plainly, without drama or weight, just as a fact being reported. I'm not trying to make it a thing. I just missed you. You were my best friend, and then you weren't there, and that was just hard for a while. Emma didn't answer immediately. She looked at her glass. When she looked back up at him, something in her face was more open than it had been all evening. I missed you too, she said. A lot. More than I let myself think about. Lily stirred, shifted, resettled without waking. Nathan looked at his daughter's sleeping face, at the dark lashes fanned against her cheeks, at the tiny furrow between her brows that came from his side of the family, at the way her mouth was slightly open and she'd gotten a small crease on her cheek from the chair. He felt in that moment like a man standing at the exact intersection of the life he had and the life that was still possible, which was a strange thing to feel in a barn at 9:30 at a neighbor's wedding. But there it was. We should do this again, Emma said. Not the wedding, just talking. Yeah, he said. We should. She stood to go. Had to be up early, she said, something about a project deadline Sunday afternoon. And she came around the table and she put her hand briefly on his shoulder, the way old friends do. The easy physical language of people who trust each other. It's really good to see you, Nathan. You too, Em. She smiled at him once more, the crooked left side one. And then she was gone, moving through the thinning crowd toward the exit, and Nathan sat beside his sleeping daughter in a barn full of string lights and let himself feel the strange and genuine warmth of the evening. He'd spent 11 days avoiding this wedding. He was going to spend a long time thinking about what would have happened if he hadn't gone. Outside, the night was clear and cool and full of the particular silence that falls after music stops. Nathan carried Lily to the car. She barely woke up, just looped her arms around his neck on instinct, and buckled her into her seat and pulled out of the gravel parking lot and drove home through streets quiet enough that he could hear his own thoughts. He didn't let himself examine all of them. Not tonight. But when he got home and settled Lily into her bed and went back downstairs to lock up, he stood for a moment at the kitchen window with the lights off, looking out at the dark neighborhood, at the quiet grid of houses and driveways, and the one streetlight on the corner that had been flickering for 3 weeks. Somewhere on Brentwood Lane, 4 blocks away, Emma Carter was unlocking a front door, walking into a house he'd never seen, living a life he knew almost nothing about, full of running routes, and a judgmental cat named Gerald in contract work, and whatever reasons she'd been slightly vague about when she'd explained why she moved back. He thought about her saying, I didn't want to find out we were strangers. He thought about how they weren't. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, and he didn't sleep right away, and he didn't feel bad about that. He saw her 4 days later at the corner of Maple and 5th at 7:15 in the morning. She was running. Nathan was walking Lily to school, a 20-minute route he'd taken so many times he could do it half asleep, which on Wednesdays he basically was, when he caught movement at the far end of the block. The particular rhythm of someone who ran regularly, not the choppy, desperate stride of someone trying to get somewhere, but the settled, almost automatic motion of a person who had made peace with the distance. Emma had her headphones on. She wasn't going to see him. He almost let her pass. "Emma!" She slowed, pulled one earbud out, looked around. When she spotted him, something crossed her face. Surprise, then something warmer. "Hey!" She jogged the last few steps toward them, breathing harder than she was trying to show. Her hair was pulled back, she had no makeup on, and there was a small grass stain on her left shoe that she probably didn't know about. "Running," he said. "I told you." She put her hands on her knees briefly, then straightened. 7 years of evidence that I wasn't lying. Lily had been watching this exchange with the particular surveillance energy she reserved for things that interested her. "You're the lady from the wedding," she announced. "That's me," Emma said. "Emma. And you're Lily." "I know who I am." "Fair enough." Nathan put his hand on Lily's shoulder in the way that said, "Be slightly less yourself for 60 seconds. Lily tolerated it. "You're 4 blocks away," he said. "I know. I looked up Crescent Drive after the wedding." Emma caught herself. "That sounds more to..." "It doesn't," he said. "Which house?" "The green one with the bad gutters. 214 Brentwood." "I know that house. The gutters have been bad since before you moved in." "I know. I've told the landlord twice." She paused, shifted her weight, looked at him with something he still couldn't fully decode. "You should come by sometime." I finally unpacked the last box. "Only took 6 months?" "It was a very stubborn box." She glanced at Lily. "Lots of books." "What kind of books?" Lily asked, because Lily asked follow-up questions about everything. "All kinds." "Do you like books?" "Only ones with pictures." "Smart," Emma said seriously. "The words 'only ones' are a long con." Lily looked at Nathan with an expression that said she approved of this person's position on literature. They said goodbye at the corner. Emma put her earbud back in and ran. Nathan walked Lily the rest of the way to school, and Lily did not comment on Emma again until they were half a block from the entrance, when she said simply, "She's nice," and ran toward the door without elaborating. Nathan walked home alone. He thought about the greenhouse with the bad gutters. He knew exactly which house it was. He'd driven past it 100 times without thinking about it. A small 2-bedroom with a covered porch and a rose bush by the front steps that the previous tenant had apparently planted and then abandoned to its own survival instincts. He thought 4 blocks. He thought 6 months. He thought about a lot of things he didn't have clean language for yet, and then he got home and made himself another cup of coffee and opened his laptop and did the work he needed to do, because that was what you did. The second time they ran into each other was at the farmer's market on Saturday, which was less of a coincidence since the farmer's market was on Elm Street and everyone in a 4-block radius went to it on Saturday mornings. Nathan was there with Lily, who had already somehow acquired a small potted succulent from a vendor and was carrying it with both hands like a religious offering. He was trying to figure out if $3 was a reasonable price for a single heirloom tomato. It was not, and he was going to buy it anyway. When he heard Emma's voice behind him, she was on the phone, not a happy call from the tone of it, clipped, controlled, the kind of voice someone uses when they're trying to stay professional while also being frustrated. She had a canvas bag over one shoulder and was standing between a bread stand and a honey vendor, half turned away. And she didn't see him. He bought the tomato. He bought a second one. He moved toward the bread stand and waited, because it felt weird to walk away when she was clearly upset about something. She hung up about 2 minutes later, let out a long breath, turned around and nearly walked into him. "Hey." She caught herself. Hi, sorry." "Bad call?" "Client," she said, "or former client, or..." She stopped. "It's a whole thing." "You don't have to explain." "No, it's fine." She rubbed the side of her neck. "I did contract work for this firm in the city, and they're now arguing about whether I'm owed the second half of a payment on a project I completed 4 months ago, so..." "That's not a whole thing. That's a breach of contract." "Allegedly. According to them, I didn't deliver the scope in full. According to me and the literally finished report sitting in my portfolio, I did." "Do you have a lawyer?" I have a friend who's a paralegal who's given me a lot of free advice over the phone, which is not the same thing. Yes, I know. She looked at Lily. Hi, Lily. Is that a plant? Lily held up the succulent. His name is Terrence. Emma looked at Nathan. She named it in the car on the way here, he said. Good name, Emma told Lily. Terrence is a name that commands respect. Lily considered this. I know. They walked the market together for the next 40 minutes without making a decision about it. Emma picked up a jar of blackberry jam and argued briefly with Nathan about whether jam or jelly was the objectively superior product. She was pro-jam, he was pro-jelly. Both of them were more invested in this debate than was entirely rational. And Lily walked between them with Terrence and occasionally weighed in with opinions that favored whichever side had most recently acknowledged her. They got coffee from the cart near the exit. Lily got a hot chocolate and sat on a bench and held the cup with both hands like a small, dignified elder, while Nathan and Emma stood nearby and talked about things that had nothing to do with contracts or logistics or the 7 years they'd been out of each other's lives. Emma talked about the neighborhood, what she liked about it, what surprised her, the way it had changed and also hadn't. She'd grown up about 30 miles from here, not in this specific area, but close enough that it felt familiar without being loaded with history. No ghosts, she said. Is that what you needed? She thought about it honestly. I think I needed somewhere that felt like a place you could actually live in, not just exist in while doing something else. She wrapped both hands around her cup. Chicago was good. I learned a lot there, but I was always doing something toward the next thing. I never just lived there. A pause. Does that make sense? Yeah, he said. It does. She looked at him over the rim of her cup. Where are you, Nathan? Actually, do you feel like you live here? The question was so direct it caught him slightly off guard. Most people asked how he was doing, not whether he was present in his own life. Mostly, he said carefully, there are days when it's just logistics. School pickup, dinner, bedtime, repeat. And I don't mind the logistics, they're mine. But yeah, mostly I'm here. Lily makes it hard to be anywhere else. Emma nodded. Her eyes moved to Lily on the bench, still perfectly still with her hot chocolate, watching a pigeon with scientific interest. She's lucky, Emma said quietly. She's stuck with me is what she is. Same thing. She said it simply, no decoration, and he felt it land somewhere it had no business landing on a Saturday morning at a farmer's market. They said goodbye near the parking lot. Emma had apparently walked from Brentwood Lane. Of course she had. She was a runner. The distance was nothing to her. And she adjusted the canvas bag on her shoulder and said she'd see him around. Hey, Nathan said, you want to come for dinner sometime this week? I'll make the risotto. He hadn't planned to say that either. Emma blinked. Then, the 40-minute risotto that you always say you won't make? I'll make it, she smiled. Yeah, she said. I'd like that. She came on Thursday. Nathan spent more time on dinner than he'd admit to, which meant he was annoyed at himself by the time she rang the doorbell at 6:30. The risotto was already done and resting. Lily was already cleaned up from school and wearing a shirt that was inside out, but had decided she didn't care, a position Nathan had decided not to challenge because they'd already had the shoes conversation and he only had so much energy. Emma came in with a bottle of wine and a small bag of cookies from the bakery on 5th, and she handed the cookies directly to Lily without being asked, which earned her a level of goodwill that Nathan usually had to maintain through sustained effort. Dinner was good, not perfect. The risotto was slightly oversalted, and Nathan noticed it even if nobody said anything, but good in the way that mattered, which was that the table was full, and there was conversation and nobody was eating in front of a screen. Emma talked to Lily with the specific quality of an adult who was actually interested, not performing interest. And Lily responded by being about 40% less chaotic than usual, which Nathan filed away as meaningful data. After dinner, Lily went through the entire catalog of things she'd been told by her teacher that week, which was substantial. Emma listened to all of it. When Lily finally ran out of material and went to get her pajamas, Emma sat back in her chair and looked at Nathan across the table. She told her class that her dad makes food from scratch, Emma said. She told you that? Earlier, when you were getting the plates, she said her teacher asked what from scratch meant, and she said it means her dad doesn't use boxes. Emma paused. I think she's proud of you. Nathan looked at the table. She told me yesterday that I was boring. 6-year-olds contain multitudes. He laughed. He got up to clear the plates, and Emma stood without being asked and helped. And they did the dishes the way two people do who've been in kitchens together before. Not efficiently, because they kept interrupting the process with conversation, but comfortably. Gerald the cat came up twice. Emma had clearly been talking about Gerald to someone because the cat's particular brand of chaotic neutrality was becoming a recurring subject. And Nathan's own domestic complaints surfaced organically. The slow-draining kitchen sink and the back fence panel that had been threatening to fall for 3 months, and the school fundraiser that required him to sell 30 boxes of overpriced chocolate by the end of the month. 30 boxes, Emma said. To who? That's the problem. How many have you sold? He considered lying. 4. And one of those was to myself. She laughed with her whole face. He'd forgotten she did that. Lily came back in pajamas and was walked through the bedtime routine, book, water, the specific blanket arrangement she required. And Nathan spent 20 minutes upstairs while Emma stayed in the kitchen finishing her wine. When he came back down, she was sitting at the kitchen table, not on her phone, just sitting, her hands around her glass, looking at the middle distance with an expression he couldn't fully read. She noticed him come in. Her expression shifted back to present. Asleep? She asked. Out in about 6 minutes. New record. She was moving fast all day. She moves fast every day. He sat across from her. You good? Yeah. She looked at her glass. I was just thinking. He waited. I used to wonder, she said slowly, what kind of parent you'd be. Back when we were, 21, 22. You used to talk about wanting kids someday, but you were always kind of vague about it. Like it was something that would just happen to future Nathan, and present Nathan didn't have to think about it yet. That's accurate. And then it happened, and you're just... She stopped. I don't know. You're really good at it, Nathan, and I don't think you know that. He sat with that for a moment. I mess up a lot. I know you do. That's not what I said. He looked at her. There was something in her face that was careful and open at the same time, the expression of someone choosing their honesty deliberately. He felt the warmth of it, and also the weight of it, and he didn't know what to do with either. More wine? He said, because he needed another 10 seconds. No, I should go. She stood, picked up her glass, set it in the sink. But this was really good, Nathan. Dinner, all of it. We should do it again. Absolutely. She found her jacket over the back of the chair where she'd dropped it when she came in. Next time I cook, fair warning, I'm better than I used to be, but I have a limited repertoire, and I will tell you in advance what it is so you can manage your expectations. What's your best dish? Honestly, breakfast food, I make exceptional eggs. At dinner? At any time, eggs don't have a schedule. She zipped her jacket. I'll text you. You have my number? I got it from you at the wedding. You gave it to me before I left. He hadn't remembered that. He remembered the hand on his shoulder. He hadn't remembered the number. Right. She walked toward the door, stopped in the hallway, turned halfway. The thing I said before, she said, about you being good at this. I meant it. I wanted to say it while I still could, without it getting weird. It didn't get weird. It almost did. Almost, he allowed. She gave him the crooked smile. Then she opened the door and walked out into the quiet street, and Nathan stood in his doorway for a moment watching her go the way you watch something you don't want to look away from just yet. And then the night settled around him and he went inside. He stood in the kitchen for a while. The dishes were done, the chairs were pushed back in. There was still half a bottle of wine on the counter and the faint smell of dinner in the air, and the house felt different somehow. Not empty in the way it usually did after Lily went to bed, but simply quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after good company, not the absence of it. He was somewhere he hadn't been in a long time, and he recognized that, and he wasn't sure what to do about it. He put away the wine. He turned off the kitchen light. He went upstairs and checked on Lily once. She was sideways across the bed in the way she always ended up, her arm hanging off the edge, and he stood there in the dark for a moment watching her breathe. 4 blocks away, Emma was walking up a front path past an abandoned rose bush, unlocking a door, going inside to a house where a cat named Gerald would probably knock something off a shelf within the next 10 minutes. Nathan went to bed. He did not sleep quickly. He lay in the dark, and he thought about what she'd said. I wanted to say it while I still could, without it getting weird. And he thought about the fact that it hadn't gotten weird, and he thought about what that meant exactly, and how close to the surface something was starting to move that he wasn't ready to name out loud. Not yet, but close. He thought about the corner of Maple and 5th at 7:15 in the morning, and Table 9, and the way she'd said we're not strangers like it was the most obvious thing in the world, and the way Lily had said she's nice with such total simplicity, as if she'd already done the calculation and filed the result. He thought, something is happening. He thought, I know what it is. He thought, I'm not going to say it yet. And that was where he left it, sitting at the edge of the thing, not crossing over, just aware of where the line was, which was about as honest as he could be with himself right now. And maybe that was enough. Outside, a car moved slowly through the neighborhood. The streetlight on the corner flickered twice, then held. The house was quiet. The call came on a Tuesday. Emma was at Nathan's kitchen table when it happened. A Wednesday evening thing had quietly become a Thursday evening thing, and then an occasional Tuesday thing as well, the kind of schedule drift that neither of them had announced or discussed. It had just accrued the way small habits do. She was working on her laptop, he was going through Lily's school folder at the other end of the table, and Lily was on the living room floor assembling something architectural out of wooden blocks. And the whole scene had the low, comfortable hum of people who had gotten used to being in the same room. Emma's phone lit up on the table beside her. She glanced at it. Something changed in her face. Subtle, the way weather changes before you can feel it. And she picked it up and walked into the hallway. Nathan didn't try to listen. He went back to the school folder, which contained a permission slip for a field trip, a newsletter about a fundraiser he was already losing, and a drawing Lily had made of what appeared to be their house, but with a swimming pool that definitely did not exist. Emma was in the hallway for 11 minutes. He knew because he checked the time when she left and again when she came back, not out of suspicion, but because he'd learned to track things at the edges of his attention. She came back to the table and sat down. She didn't open her laptop. You okay? He asked. Yeah. She looked at her hands on the table. That was a firm in Seattle. Hargrove & Associates, urban infrastructure, mid-sized. They do mostly public sector contracts. A pause. They offered me a senior project lead position, full-time, with benefits and a relocation package. Nathan set down the permission slip. Seattle. Seattle. He looked at her. She was looking at the table still, with the careful expression of someone who was trying not to let the size of a thing show on their face before they decided how to feel about it. That's a good firm, he said. Because it was. He didn't know the firm specifically, but he knew the type. Mid-sized consultancies doing public infrastructure work were exactly where someone like Emma could build something real, not just execute someone else's vision. It is, she said. When did you apply? 3 months ago, before... She stopped. A while back. I was sending out a lot of applications after the contract dispute went sideways, just trying to have options. That makes sense. I know. She finally looked up at him. They want an answer by Friday. It was Tuesday. 3 days. Nathan held the information. He was good at doing that, holding information before he reacted to it, a skill he'd developed partly from parenting and partly from having been the kind of person who'd said the wrong thing at the wrong moment enough times to learn caution. What are you thinking? He asked. I'm thinking about 15 things at the same time. She pushed her laptop slightly to the side. It's a really good opportunity. The kind that doesn't come twice, probably. Senior project lead at my age, in that city, that's 3-4 years ahead of where I'd expect to be on a normal trajectory. Yeah. And I've been here 6 months. I like it here. She stopped again. There was something in the pause that she wasn't finishing, and they both knew it, and neither of them moved to close the gap. I have a life here, or the beginning of one. From the living room, Lily announced that her tower was the tallest she'd ever built, and both of them turned automatically to look. The tower was in fact impressive. About 18 blocks high, slightly tilted, with a precarious topmost block that was balanced more on hope than architecture. "Good work, Lil," Nathan called. Lily beamed without looking at them, entirely focused on the tower's structural integrity. Nathan turned back to Emma. "You should take it," he said. He said it evenly, without drama, the way he said things he'd already decided on. Emma looked at him. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Say the clean thing because it's easier than saying the complicated thing." He leaned back in his chair. "I'm not saying it because it's clean. I'm saying it because it's true. That kind of opportunity, you don't turn that down because you've been in a neighborhood for 6 months." "Nathan." "What?" She held his gaze for a long moment. Her expression was doing something complicated, the kind of thing that happened when someone was trying to be honest without being reckless. "This isn't just about the neighborhood." The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. The only sound was Lily narrating something to herself in the other room. A low, self-directed commentary that she always kept going, the private language of a child absorbed in her own world. "I know," Nathan said finally. "Do you?" "Yeah." He looked at the table. "I know." He wasn't going to be the one to say it. Not now, not like this, with a job offer hanging in the air and 3 days on the clock. That felt like the worst possible version of saying it, leveraging a moment of pressure, using her uncertainty as a foothold. He wasn't going to do that to her. "You should think about it," he said. "Not tonight, not right now. Think about it." Emma exhaled slowly. She picked up her water glass and held it without drinking. "I hate that you're being reasonable about this," she said. "I know. It's very irritating. I've been told that before." She almost smiled, the crooked left side just barely. Then she picked up her laptop again, and they sat in the same room in different silences for the rest of the evening, and it was the first time the quiet between them had held any tension in it. She didn't bring it up again Wednesday. She texted Thursday morning, just "still thinking," and he texted back, "Take your time." And then he put his phone face down on his desk and did not think about Seattle for the next 3 hours, which was a lie. He thought about Seattle approximately every 7 minutes. He took Lily to the park Thursday afternoon, which he did most Thursdays when the weather held. It was cooling into October now, the kind of afternoon that was warm in the sun and sharp in the shade, and Lily wanted to go on the swings first, then the slide, then the swings again, and Nathan pushed her and pulled her and ran when required. And for a while, the whole Seattle problem receded to the background because Lily demanded that kind of attention. They were on the way back, Lily's hand in his, her sneakers scuffing the sidewalk, a stick she'd collected somewhere along the way being dragged against every fence they passed, when she said, out of nowhere, "Is Emma going somewhere?" Nathan looked down at her. "Why do you ask?" "She seemed sad on Tuesday." He thought about that. Lily noticed things. She had always noticed things. Not loudly, not with commentary, but she filed things away and surfaced them at unexpected moments. He'd thought enough times about how much she'd observed and stored without him knowing. "She has a hard decision to make," he said carefully. "What kind?" "The kind where both options are good, but you can only pick one." Lily considered this, dragging her stick along a chain-link fence in a rhythmic rattle. "That's bad," she said. "Yeah, it is." "Does she want to go?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know, Lil." "Do you want her to stay?" He looked at his daughter. She was watching him with those dark, steady eyes, Dana's eyes, but the directness was his, and the question was so plainly delivered that deflecting it felt dishonest. "Yeah," he said, "I do." Lily nodded, like she'd already known and was just confirming. She went back to the stick and the fence. The rattle resumed. "You should tell her," Lily said. "It's more complicated than that." "Why?" "Because she has to make the decision for herself, not because of me." Lily appeared to process this for half a block. "That sounds lonely," she said finally. He didn't have a counter for that. He just kept walking. Emma called Friday morning at 9:42. "Can you talk?" she said. "Give me 1 second." He was in the middle of a work call, muted it with an apology he typed fast into the chat window, stepped into the hallway. "Okay. Yeah, what's happening?" "I'm supposed to call them by noon." "Okay. I've been sitting at my table for 2 hours and I have a pros and cons list that has exactly the same number of items on both sides, and Gerald knocked it off the table 20 minutes ago, and I think he was trying to tell me something. Nathan sat on the stairs. What do you want to do? I want someone to tell me what to do. Emma? I know. Nobody can tell me. She exhaled. Can you just talk to me for a minute? Just normal. Can we just talk? Yeah, of course. She was quiet for a second. Then, how's Lily? She's at school. She told me to tell you hi. That wasn't what Lily had said, but the spirit of it wasn't wrong. She did? She asked about you yesterday. Emma was quiet again, a different kind of quiet. The thing is, she said, and her voice was slightly rougher now, like she was working to keep it level, I tried to imagine myself in Seattle. Like, actually there. Apartment, new commute, new office, all of it. And it looked fine. It looked successful. It looked like what I thought I was building toward. But I couldn't put anything warm in it. A pause. I kept imagining it, and it kept being successful and hollow, and that scared me more than turning down the job. Nathan pressed the heel of his hand against his knee. He was careful with what he said next, careful in the way he'd been careful since Tuesday, because he knew his weight in this situation and he refused to use it unfairly. Here's what I think, he said. I think you're someone who is very good at building toward goals. You've been doing it your whole life, Chicago, the career, all of it. And that skill is real. It's part of who you are, and it served you. But building toward something isn't the same as living somewhere. You said that at the farmer's market. You said you never actually lived in Chicago. You just existed there while doing something else. He paused. So the question isn't whether Seattle is a good opportunity. It is. The question is whether it's the right life. Silence on the line. He could hear her breathing, barely. And you're allowed to want a life, he said. Not just a career, both. You're allowed to want both. Nathan, her voice had dropped. Yeah. I'm going to ask you something and I need you to answer honestly. His chest tightened. Okay? If I stay, she stopped, restarted. If I stay, is there something here? Or am I building a whole case on something that's just old friendship? The stairs were hard under him. The hallway was very still. He'd told himself he wasn't going to do this, wasn't going to make himself part of her calculation. But she'd asked him directly, honestly, the way she asked everything, and he owed her the same. It's not just old friendship, he said. It hasn't been just that for a while. The silence that followed was about 4 seconds long and felt much longer. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. Okay. He could hear her exhale. That's okay. I needed to know that. Emma, I still think the decision has to be about what you want, not about me. What I just said, I'm not saying it to keep you here. I'm saying it because you asked, and I won't lie to you. I know. A pause. I know you, Nathan. I know exactly what you were doing. You were trying not to influence me, which is a very you thing to do, and it's also extremely frustrating. You've mentioned that I'm frustrating, consistently. There was a warmth in her voice now, underneath the tension. He held on to it. What are you going to do? He asked. I think I already know. She sounded steadier. I think I've known since Tuesday, and I've been checking and rechecking my own math to make sure I wasn't making a decision based on the wrong thing. And I'm not. A pause. I'm staying. He closed his eyes for a moment, opened them. The hallway looked the same. Okay, he said. That's it? Okay? What do you want me to say? I don't know. Something more than okay. He thought for a moment. I'm glad, he said. I'm really, genuinely glad. And I think you're making the right call. And I also think you need to hang up, call Seattle, and then go have a large coffee somewhere and stop looking at Gerald's weather predictions. She laughed. The real one, full length, the one he would have noticed anywhere. I'll call you later, she said. I'll be here. She hung up. He He sat on the stairs for another minute, phone in his hand, the quiet of the empty house around him. He thought about what he'd said. It hasn't been just that for a while. He thought about how true it was and how long it had been true, and how saying it out loud hadn't made him feel exposed the way he'd expected. It had made him feel like someone who'd finally put something heavy down. He got up, went back to his desk, unmuted the work call, which had mercifully moved on without him. He got through the rest of the morning on autopilot, doing the work that needed doing, sending the emails that needed sending, making a grocery list and moving a dentist appointment, and all the ordinary machinery of a life. But there was something running underneath all of it. Not anxiety exactly, not elation exactly, something more like the feeling of a door that had been stuck for a long time finally moving on its hinges. Emma texted at 12:17, called them, turned it down. Gerald looked smug. Nathan looked at the text for a long moment. He typed back, "Come for dinner tonight." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "I'll bring the eggs," she wrote. He smiled at his phone in the way he was grateful nobody was there to see, put it face down on the desk, and went back to work. The afternoon moved. The light through the window shifted from flat to gold as it dropped toward the tree line. At 3 o'clock he drove to school and got Lily, who climbed into the back seat and announced that her class had learned about volcanoes and that she wanted one in the backyard. "We can talk about it," Nathan said, which was the parenting equivalent of no, but delivered with more dignity for everyone. "Emma's coming tonight," Lily said. "Not a question." "How do you know that?" "Because you made me clean my room this morning." He looked at her in the rearview mirror. She was looking out the window, utterly serene. "She's staying," he said. "She's not moving away." Lily nodded once. "Good," she said, and then, "Can we have the eggs thing she makes?" "That's what she's bringing." "Good," Lily said again, with the tone of someone whose assessment of the situation had been correct all along and was gracious enough not to say so. Nathan drove them home through the October afternoon, past the corner of Maple and Fifth, past Brentwood Lane and the greenhouse with the bad gutters, and something in the air felt different from how it had felt 3 days ago. Not resolved. Not yet. There was still a conversation ahead of them that hadn't been finished, still things that had only been half said, but the weight of what might have happened, the version of things where she'd called Seattle back and said yes and packed a moving truck, that particular weight had lifted. The house was waiting for them, the same as always. Lily's backpack hit the floor by the door, her shoes followed, and she was halfway up the stairs before Nathan had even set his keys down. He stood for a moment in the front hallway, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around him. 4 blocks away, Emma Carter was in her kitchen, probably feeding Gerald, probably still holding the low-grade relief and low-grade terror of a decision made and committed to, probably already second-guessing one small edge of it the way anyone would. She was not someone who made peace with things instantly. She was someone who had to sit with them first, walk around them, check them from every angle. He knew that about her. He knew a lot of things about her that had come back to him over the past weeks, like photographs surfacing in developing fluid. The old ones first, then the recent ones, each one a little sharper than the last. He went to the kitchen and started prepping. The eggs were her thing, the rest was his. He had a decent rosemary bread from the farmer's market, some good cheese, the last of the heirloom tomatoes sliced thin on a plate. Simple things. The table set for 3. Outside, the street light on the corner flickered on early, as it sometimes did when the sensors miscalibrated. It held steady. Through the kitchen window, the neighborhood arranged itself into its evening shape. The blue hour light, the distant sound of someone's dog, the first lamp coming on in a house across the street. At 6 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. The eggs were, in fact, exceptional. Emma made them in a cast-iron skillet she'd brought from her house in a canvas bag, because she'd learned at some point that the difference between good eggs and great eggs was the pan, and she wasn't willing to compromise on that. She did them slow, lower heat than Nathan would have used, more butter than he'd have felt comfortable with, a fold at the end rather than a scramble, with sharp cheddar pulled in at the last 30 seconds, and fresh chives she'd clipped from the small pot on her kitchen windowsill. She moved around his kitchen with the ease of someone who had stopped asking where things were, and had simply learned. Lily ate 2 helpings and then asked if Emma could come every Friday and make eggs for dinner. and Emma said she'd have to check her schedule, and Lily said her schedule should include eggs on Fridays, and Nathan said that was enough scheduling for one evening, and Lily accepted this with the diplomatic tolerance of someone who had already won the important argument. After dinner, after Lily was in bed, they sat on the back porch. It was the first time they'd done that. The back porch was Nathan's space in a way the kitchen wasn't. A slightly battered wooden deck with two mismatched chairs and a string of outdoor lights he'd put up 2 summers ago and never taken down. The October night was cold enough to need jackets. Emma had borrowed one of his, an old gray fleece she'd pulled from the hook by the back door without asking, and it was too big for her in the shoulders and she didn't seem to notice or care. They talked for 2 hours. Not about Seattle, not about the phone call, not about what he'd said on the stairs that morning. Around it, and through it, and past it, the way 2 people do when they're both aware that a thing has been said, and neither of them is quite ready to pick it up with both hands in the full light. They talked about her new contract. A smaller local firm had offered her something. Not as big as Seattle, but solid. Work she could do from here. They talked about Lily's volcano ambitions and whether a science fair project might be a viable compromise. Emma talked about Gerald, who had apparently begun sitting on her laptop while she worked in a way that suggested either deep attachment or territorial aggression. Nathan talked about the back fence panel, which had finally given up and fallen over that morning, and Emma said she knew a guy who did fence work cheaply and reliably, a neighbor from her end of the block. And Nathan said that was useful information, and Emma said she'd been collecting useful information about the neighborhood for 6 months, and she was prepared to share it freely. At some point past 10, Emma said she should go. She stood and gave him back his fleece and walked through the house to the front door, and he walked her out to the porch the way he always did now without thinking about it. The street was quiet. The corner streetlight was holding steady for once. She turned at the bottom of the porch steps, looked up at him. "Nathan." "Yeah." "What you said this morning." She held his gaze. "I've been carrying it around all day." "I know. I'm not going to pretend I didn't hear it. I know that too." She stood there in the October dark, her canvas bag over one shoulder, and the look on her face was the most unguarded he'd seen it since the wedding, since table 9, since the song, since she'd said we're not strangers like it was the simplest fact in the world. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I know. I needed you to know that I heard it and that I—" She stopped. "I'm not going anywhere." She said it the second time differently, and they both understood that she wasn't talking about Seattle. He held the look for a moment, then, "Go home, Em. Feed Gerald." She smiled, the full crooked one, and shook her head slightly like he was incorrigible, and walked down the path toward the street. At the sidewalk, she turned once, briefly, the way she sometimes did, and then she was gone down Brentwood Lane, and Nathan stood on the porch in the cold and felt something in him that was quietly enormous. He wasn't going to rush it. That was the thing. Whatever this was, and he knew what it was, he'd known for weeks, probably longer if he was honest, probably since a slow song in a barn and her hand in his. He wasn't going to push it into a shape before it was ready. They had time. For possibly the first time in his adult life, he felt like he genuinely had time. He went inside, locked the door, went to bed. He slept fine. The barbecue happened 3 weeks later, on a Saturday in early November that was warm enough to justify it if you dressed right, and accepted that summer was a memory. It was at Brad and Susan's place, the golden retriever couple from table 9, who had apparently decided that the wedding had given the neighborhood sufficient social momentum, and they were going to capitalize on it before winter shut everything down. The invitation had gone out via a neighborhood group text, which Nathan was on through a series of events he couldn't fully reconstruct, and which he checked approximately twice a year. He'd almost not gone. He'd been planning a low-key Saturday, a project deadline in the morning, the park with Lily in the afternoon, maybe Emma coming over for dinner if the timing worked. But Lily had seen the text notification on his phone, understood immediately that there would be food and other children involved, and the matter had been settled. Emma was already there when they arrived. She was standing near the drink table with a red cup of something, talking to a woman Nathan vaguely recognized from the other end of the block. Tall, early 50s, wore a lot of fleece, had opinions about composting. Emma spotted Nathan and Lily coming through the gate and lifted her hand, and Lily broke from Nathan's side and navigated directly toward her with zero hesitation, like a small guided missile with pigtails. The yard was full, maybe 30 people, which was a lot for a neighborhood gathering, but Brad and Susan had clearly been thorough with the group text. There was a long folding table with food, a grill smoking at the far end of the yard, attended by Brad with the focused energy of a man who took his grilling seriously. The golden retriever moving through the crowd looking for dropped items with professional determination. Nathan got a drink, talked to a couple of neighbors, relocated Lily twice when she drifted too close to the grill. Emma moved through the gathering the way she moved through most social situations, with an ease that wasn't performance, that came from actually being interested in people. And he watched her from across the yard once and thought about how naturally she'd fitted herself into all of this. The neighborhood, the Saturdays, Lily's universe. He was talking to Kevin Marsh, whose sunburn had finally faded from honeymoon intensity, when it happened. A woman named Diane, whom Nathan knew only as a neighbor 2 blocks over, appeared at his side. Diane was somewhere in her 60s and had the direct conversational style of someone who'd decided at some point that social diplomacy was optional. "Nathan," she said without preamble, "you're here with Emma Carter." "We came separately," he said. "But she's here, yes." Diane looked at Emma, who was across the yard showing Lily something on her phone, looked back at Nathan. "Are you two together?" The question landed with the particular weight of a thing said out loud in public that had previously only existed in private. Kevin, to his credit, suddenly became very interested in his drink. "We're friends," Nathan said, because that was true and also because it was the easiest answer. "You don't look like just friends," Diane said with the confidence of someone who'd been watching people for 6 decades and trusted her own read. "Diane," Kevin said. "I'm not being rude," Diane said. "I'm being direct. There's a difference." She looked at Nathan. "I've watched you two all afternoon, just saying." She moved off toward the food table with the casual authority of someone who had delivered a verdict and was unconcerned with the appeal process. Nathan stood with Kevin in a brief silence. "She's not wrong," Kevin said into his drink. "I don't need the commentary. I'm just agreeing with Diane. I heard Diane." Emma appeared at Nathan's elbow about 30 seconds later, Lily having been absorbed into a loose group of kids near the far fence. She looked between Nathan and Kevin. "What happened? You both look like you got called to the principal's office." "Diane asked if we're together," Nathan said. Emma blinked. Then she looked across the yard to where Diane was now loading a plate with coleslaw, unbothered. "Just walked up and asked?" Direct is her word for it. Emma pressed her lips together. He could see her trying not to smile and mostly failing. "What did you say?" "That we're friends." "Okay." "She said we don't look like just friends." Emma was quiet for a moment. The smile had settled into something more complicated. She looked at him with an expression he'd gotten better at reading, the one that was careful and open at the same time, the one that meant she was deciding how honest to be. "She's not wrong," Emma said. Kevin made a quiet sound that was technically a cough. "I'm getting more food," Kevin said, and removed himself from the situation with the velocity of a man who had learned when to exit. Nathan and Emma stood in the middle of the party, people moving around them, the smell of grilled meat and October air, the golden retriever having apparently found something worth investigating under the folding table. "We should talk about that," Nathan said. He kept his voice low, not secretive, just private. "I know. Not here." "Obviously not here." She looked at him. There was something in her face that wasn't nervous exactly, more like the expression of someone standing at the edge of something and being okay with it. "Tonight? Come over after this. Lily will be out early. She's been running since 11. Emma nodded. Her shoulder was close enough to his that they were almost touching, the way they'd been standing next to each other for weeks without addressing it. "Okay," she said. They rejoined the party. They talked to different people. Nathan helped Brad's golden retriever out from under the food table when it got its collar hooked on a fold of the tablecloth, which took longer than expected and involved 3 people in a minor crisis with the coleslaw. Lily ate an unreasonable amount of chips and then ran around the yard for an hour until the chips weren't a problem anymore. Emma helped Susan carry plates inside and they stayed in the kitchen for 20 minutes talking, and Nathan watched through the window and thought about how a person could become part of something without any single moment that announced it. By 5:30, the gathering was thinning, people drifting home in the particular unhurried way of afternoon parties that had run their natural course. Nathan collected Lily, who was boneless with tiredness, and draped herself over him while he said goodbyes. "She's asleep on your shoulder," Emma said, appearing beside him. "Not quite. Give her 6 more minutes. I'll come by at 8. He looked at her over Lily's head. "Okay." She left. He drove home. Lily was in fact asleep in the back seat before they reached the corner. Not. The house was quiet by 7:15. Lily had woken briefly when he carried her in, enough to go through the motions of teeth brushing and pajamas, and then had been out again before he finished reading the second page of her book. He closed her door gently and stood in the hallway for a moment, the specific silence of a house with a sleeping child pressing in around him. He went downstairs, cleaned up the kitchen. There wasn't much to clean, they'd been out all afternoon, and made coffee because it gave his hands something to do. At 8:05, Emma knocked. She came in with the easy familiarity that had built up over weeks of this. Jacket on the hook by the door, shoes lined up below it, the particular way she moved through his house that said she knew where things were. She accepted the coffee he offered and sat at the kitchen table, and he sat across from her, and the house was quiet around them. "So," she said. "So," he said. She put both hands around the mug, looked at it, then at him. "I've been thinking about what you said on the phone that day, after the Seattle call." She paused. "You said it hasn't been just old friendship for a while." "Yeah. And I've been thinking about what I've been sitting on for, I don't know, weeks." She stopped. "Since before the Seattle thing, honestly. Maybe since the wedding." He was very still. "You know the night we met again at table 9, Emma said, "and you asked me to dance. I want to be honest with you about something. When that song started, I thought, oh, this is going to be fine. This is just Nathan. This is just old familiar ground. And then we were actually dancing, and about 30 seconds in, I thought," she stopped. "I thought I was in trouble." "Trouble," he said. "The specific kind," she said, "where something you thought was behind you turns out to be very much in front of you." He held that. He looked at her across the table, this woman he'd known since they were 9 years old, whose laugh he could identify in a crowded room, who carried granola bars in her purse and ran 7 miles before most people were awake, and had a cat named Gerald, who knocked things off shelves for sport. "When did you start?" he started. "That night," she said simply. "Not like, I didn't walk out of the wedding with a plan. I walked out thinking I needed to be careful. And then you were 4 blocks away, and then there was the market and the dinner and the Tuesday thing, and," she exhaled, "and I kept being careful, and then Seattle happened, and I had to decide what my life was actually supposed to feel like, and I couldn't put anything warm in the Seattle picture, Nathan. I couldn't. You told me that. I know what I told you. I'm telling you what I mean now." She met his eyes. "I turned down the job because I want the life I have here. The whole thing. Including you." A pause. "Especially you." The kitchen was very quiet. Nathan set his mug down. He looked at her. At the dark eyes he'd known for most of his life. At the slight nervous set of her jaw that she didn't know she had when she was being brave about something. And he thought about 11 days and a seating chart and a song he still hadn't looked up the name of, and about table 9 and the AC unit that rattled every 40 seconds, and about all the ordinary Tuesdays and Thursday evenings and Saturday mornings that had accumulated into this exact moment. "I have a 6-year-old, he said. Not as a warning, they were both past warnings, but because it was the thing he always led with, the fact he never let anyone ignore, the ground floor of every conversation about what his life was. "I know. She comes first, every time. That's not going to change." "Nathan," Emma looked at him with the expression of someone choosing patience over exasperation, but only just. "I know Lily comes first. I would be worried about you if she didn't." She paused. "I'm not asking you to choose between us. I'm not something you have to fit into a life that's already full. I'm saying I want to be part of it. The whole thing. The risotto and the school fundraisers and the kids who won't stop naming their succulents." He almost smiled. Terrence is a good name. It's an excellent name. She held his gaze. I've been watching you with her for weeks. I know what I'm walking into. It's not easy. Some days it's really not easy. I know. I'm still here. He thought about Lily on the stairs 2 nights after Seattle, saying, that sounds lonely. He thought about how Lily had already done her own math on this situation and filed the result the way she always did. She likes you, he said. I like her. Emma's expression was clear and direct. A lot. She's funny and observant, and she has strong opinions about names, and she looks at you like you're the best thing she knows. I like her very much. He exhaled. Something in him that had been held at a particular tension, not tight, not anxious, just held, let go. Okay, he said. Emma watched him. Okay, what? Okay, I hear you. He looked at her. And I've been in love with you since approximately table 9, so. The word landed in the room and just sat there, honest and plain, no decoration. Emma blinked. Her expression shifted through something he couldn't entirely track. Surprise, then something softer and more private that she didn't try to hide. Her eyes went slightly bright, not crying, just the particular shine that came before it. You said it first, she said. One of us had to. I had a whole speech. I know, you were getting there. She laughed, the full one, abrupt and genuine. The one that had been in the world since she was 9 years old, and which he had now decided definitively was one of the best sounds he'd ever heard. She pressed her hand to her mouth briefly, and then pulled it away and looked at him with an expression so unguarded it almost hurt to look at directly. I started falling in love with you that night, she said, at the wedding, when you were watching Lily sleep and you didn't know I was looking. He hadn't known she was looking. That's when? He said. That's when. She shook her head slightly. You were just sitting there with your jacket over her, and you looked like someone who had figured something out that most people never do. And I thought, there it is, after all this time. He reached across the table. His hand covered hers on the mug. She looked at his hand, then up at him. We're doing this, she said. Not a question. Yeah, he said. We are. Outside, the night was still. The corner street light held its steady light across the street. No flickering, just constant. Somewhere in the house above them, Lily was asleep in her particular sideways sprawl, one arm off the edge of the bed, dreaming whatever 6-year-olds dreamed about. They sat at the kitchen table with their hands together and their half-finished coffee and the ordinary quiet of a house that had become familiar to both of them, and neither of them rushed what came next. There was no reason to. The evening had delivered exactly what it needed to, and the rest of it, the part that came after this moment, the part where 2 people figured out how to build something real and lasting from the ground up. That part was just beginning. Nathan didn't play a song. He didn't need to. The kitchen was enough, and Emma across from him was enough, and the small, warm weight of her hand under his was more than enough for one Friday night in November. There would be time for the rest. The thing about love the second time around, or the first time if you'd been lying to yourself about what the first time was, is that it doesn't feel the way you expect it to. Nathan had expected it to feel like relief, like the particular exhale of a long-held breath, some cinematic release of accumulated tension. What it actually felt like was more ordinary than that, and better. It felt like Emma at his kitchen table on a Sunday morning reading something on her phone while Lily ate cereal across from her and Gerald, who had relocated to Nathan's house with such gradual inevitability that there had been no single moment of decision. He had simply arrived and stayed, sat on the counter, judging everyone. It felt like a Tuesday evening run to the grocery store where Emma texted him, "We're out of eggs," using the word "we" without thinking about it, and he'd stood in the dairy aisle for 10 seconds just looking at that word. It felt like Lily taking Emma's hand in a parking lot out of pure instinct, the way she took Nathan's without ceremony or announcement. It felt like a life that had quietly expanded to fit something that had been missing, which is not to say it was easy. Easy was not the right word for any of it. Nathan was 32 years old with a custody arrangement and a back fence he'd finally gotten fixed, and a job that required more of him some months than others. And Emma was 30 years old with a new contract and a client dispute that was still grinding through its resolution and a cat with an attitude problem, and her own set of things she was still working through. They were not two people who had arrived at each other without baggage. They were two people who had arrived at each other with full bags and had decided to be honest about what was in them. That had its own complications. The first time they had a real argument was in late November, over something that started as logistics and became something bigger, the way arguments do when two people are still learning each other's pressure points. Emma had mentioned, offhandedly, that she'd run into Dana's mother, Nathan's former mother-in-law, at the pharmacy, and the conversation had been pleasant and brief. Nathan had gone quiet in a way that Emma had misread as irritation at her, when what it actually was something older and more complicated that he hadn't finished processing. Emma had pushed at the silence, the way she always pushed at silences, because silence felt to her like a door she wasn't being allowed through. And Nathan had said something short and clipped that wasn't fair, and Emma had said something back that was pointed in a way she'd later regret, and they'd ended the evening with that unresolved static in the air. He'd called her the next morning. She'd picked up on the second ring. "I wasn't annoyed at you," he said. "I was somewhere else, and I took it out in your direction. That wasn't right." A pause on her end, then, "I pushed when I shouldn't have. You're allowed to be quiet sometimes. You're allowed to want to know what's going on with me." "Yeah, but I don't have to attack a door to open it." He'd exhaled at that. "I have some stuff around the divorce that isn't fully—" He stopped. "There are some things I haven't finished sitting with, and running into Helen at the pharmacy, even just hearing about it, pulled at something. Do you want to talk about it?" He thought about it honestly. "Not all of it right now, but I will." "Okay," she said, and she meant it. The okay that wasn't just a placeholder, but a genuine settling, a patience. "I'm not going anywhere." She'd said that before. She kept meaning it. That was the thing about Emma that Nathan had needed time to really absorb. She was not fragile. She was not waiting to be disappointed. She had walked into this with her eyes open, with Lily, with the leftovers of a marriage, with the ordinary unfinished business of a man's life. And she hadn't required it to be uncomplicated. She'd just required it to be honest. That was the deal she'd offered, and the one he'd accepted, and holding up his end of it sometimes meant saying things he'd gotten used to keeping to himself. It turned out he was capable of that. It surprised him a little how capable he was of it, when the other person made it feel safe. December arrived with all of its noise and obligation, and Lily came home from school one day in the first week of the month with a paper chain she'd made, and a very specific vision for how it should be hung around the living room window. A vision she communicated with architectural precision and a complete unwillingness to compromise. Nathan and Emma spent 40 minutes on a Saturday afternoon following Lily's instructions, which involved more step stool repositioning than strictly seemed necessary, and Emma at one point looked at Nathan from across the room with an expression of amused exhaustion that he recognized as the particular face of someone who was genuinely content, and he recognized it because it was the same face he was making. Lily had adjusted to all of this with a practicality that still occasionally floored him. She had not required an explanation of what Emma was to the household now, or what had changed from the previous arrangement. She had simply registered that Emma was here more often and with more permanence, and had filed it under acceptable, actually good. The only comment she'd made directly on the subject was one evening when Nathan was tucking her in and she'd said, out of nowhere, "Emma loves you," with the same flat certainty she used when reporting facts about volcanoes. Nathan had looked at her. "You think so?" Lily gave him the look she reserved for questions that were beneath his intelligence level. "She looks at you like you're the safest place she knows," she said, and then rolled over and went to sleep. He'd stood in the doorway of her room for a long moment after that. He thought about all the ways his daughter had been watching and filing and understanding things that he'd been too close to see clearly. 6 years old, and she'd been reading the room more accurately than he had. The thing Lily had said, the safest place she knows, had come back to him several times since then, not because it was sentimental, but because it was true, and also because it cut both ways. That was what he felt about Emma too, not in a dependent way, not in the way of someone who needed rescuing or who had transferred his weight entirely onto another person, but in the way of someone who had found in another person's company the particular steadiness that made his own life feel more navigable. Not easier. More navigable. Those were different things. He'd spent 2 years after the divorce being entirely self-sufficient, which was a thing he was proud of and also a thing that had quietly cost him something. Self-sufficiency, taken too far, becomes a wall. He'd been living behind his, and he hadn't fully known it until Emma had walked through it at table 9, and he'd realized how long it had been since he'd let someone simply be in his space. Kevin and Lindsay Marsh were hosting Thanksgiving. They'd announced it in October, before the barbecue, before all of it, and the invitation had been standing since then. A proper dinner, 8 people, the kind of gathering that Kevin described as not too big, and Lindsay described as manageable, and which Nathan suspected would end up being neither. It was at their house on Crescent Drive, 3 doors down from Nathan's, in the mid-afternoon of a gray and cold Thursday that smelled like winter deciding to commit. Nathan and Emma and Lily arrived together. They'd walked. The distance was negligible, and Lily had lobbied hard for the walk because she wanted to kick through the leaf piles on the sidewalk, which she did with sustained enthusiasm for the entire 3-minute route. Kevin opened the door before they knocked. "I saw you coming down the street," he said. Lily was destroying the leaves. "She takes the job seriously," Emma said. Kevin looked at the two of them, at the ease of how they stood together, at Emma's hand briefly touching Nathan's arm as they came in, at Lily already pushing past Kevin toward the smell of food with zero social preamble, and something on his face settled into a satisfied expression that he didn't bother disguising. "You two look good," he said simply, like, together. "Good." "Thank you," Emma said before Nathan could equivocate. Kevin grinned. "Come in." The house was warm and already full of the particular organized chaos of a Thanksgiving in progress. Lindsay was in the kitchen managing 4 things at once, with the controlled energy of someone who had planned this precisely and was not accepting deviations. She embraced Emma and Nathan with the brief fierce efficiency of someone who had too many timers running to sustain a longer hug, and she looked at them with the same expression Kevin had and said, "Finally," which Nathan chose not to respond to and Emma seemed to find hilarious. The other guests were a couple from Kevin's side of the family, his sister and her husband, who were visiting from out of state and who were pleasant and easy and asked about the neighborhood with genuine interest. And Lindsay's friend from her old job, a woman named Margot, who was funny and ate 2 pieces of pie and had a lot of opinions about city planning that she and Emma ended up in a corner discussing with the focused intensity of 2 people who had found their professional equal. Lily sat at the main table because she had refused with great dignity to be relocated to any kind of separate arrangement. She ate an impressive plate of food, had a measured opinion about sweet potatoes. She was not against them, but she felt they could be improved, and spent a portion of the meal explaining to Kevin the structural engineering principles behind her Thanksgiving drawing at school, which had depicted a table that was, in her assessment, unrealistically large. "How do you know it's unrealistic?" Kevin asked, with genuine curiosity. "Tables have limits," Lily said, and Kevin looked at Nathan as if to say, "Where did she come from?" And Nathan just shrugged because he'd been asking himself that for 6 years. It was after dinner, while the table was being cleared and the kitchen was being managed in shifts, and Kevin had put on music low enough to talk over, that Lindsay found Nathan at the counter where he was doing the thing guests do, where they hover near the dishwasher offering help that isn't quite needed. She stood beside him, looked out at the living room where Emma was on the couch with Lily, the two of them apparently going through something on Emma's phone. Lily's head tilted against Emma's arm with the complete ease of a child who had decided a person was safe. "You know," Lindsay said, "when we were doing the seating chart, I almost put you at table 2. Nathan looked at her. "I moved you to table 9 because there was a last-minute change. Someone canceled, and the numbers were off, and I had to shift things around." She paused. "I almost put Emma somewhere else entirely. She wasn't originally supposed to be at that table either." "What are you telling me?" Lindsay smiled. "I'm telling you that the seating chart was a disaster, and I was stressed about it for 3 weeks, and now I think it might have been the best thing I've ever accidentally done." She looked at him sideways. "How are you, Nathan? Actually." He thought about the question with the honesty it deserved. "Good," he said. "Actually good, which is... It's been a while since that was a simple answer." "She's good for you." "I know." "You're good for her too. She seems settled in herself, like she knows where she is." He looked at Emma across the room. at the familiar line of her, the way she tilted her head when Lily was explaining something, the particular quality of attention she gave to people she cared about. "Yeah," he said. "She does." Lindsay patted his arm once and went back to the kitchen, and Nathan stood there a moment longer, holding the ordinary miracle of it. He thought about 7 years. He thought about all the versions of himself across those 7 years. The married one, the divorcing one, the newly single one, the one who'd gotten slowly better at being alone without becoming good at it, the one who'd spent 11 days avoiding a wedding invitation. He thought about table 9 and the AC unit that rattled every 40 seconds, and the seating chart disaster that had put him and Emma Carter in the same corner of a barn on a Saturday in September. People talked about fate like it was a mechanism, like something was pulling strings from above. He didn't think about it that way. He thought about it as the aggregate of 10,000 small decisions. Lindsay's last-minute number changes, his own 11-day delay, the fact that Emma had moved back to this specific neighborhood and not somewhere else, the farmer's market and the Thursday dinners, and the phone call on the stairs that Friday morning. None of those things had been destined. They'd just been the shape his life had taken, and Emma's life had taken, and somewhere in the overlap a second chance had opened up, and they'd been paying enough attention to walk through it. That was the thing about second chances. They weren't given. They were noticed. After dinner, after the pie, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch under a throw blanket with Gerald somehow materializing beside her, the cat had apparently followed them down the street, which nobody had noticed until he was already inside. Nathan and Kevin ended up on the back porch with 2 beers in the cold. They didn't talk about anything heavy. They talked about Kevin's new job, which was going well. They talked about Nathan's back fence, which was finally fixed. Kevin mentioned he and Lindsay were thinking about getting a dog, which Nathan said was a significant commitment, and Kevin said he knew, and Nathan said, "Okay then," and Kevin said he'd probably get the dog anyway. "You're happy," Kevin said, not as a question. Nathan looked at the yard, at the bare limb tree at the far end that had somehow stayed standing through 3 storms and counting. "Yeah," he said, "I am. It looks good on you. I'm not being sentimental, it literally looks good on you. You look like a person who's sleeping again." "I'm sleeping." The bags under your eyes were a whole situation for a while. "Thank you, Kevin." "I'm just saying." Kevin took a drink of his beer. "When I met you 3 years ago, you were very competent and also very locked up, like someone running a good operation but not actually living in the building." Nathan thought about that. It was accurate enough that he didn't argue with it. "Emma unlocked the building," Kevin said. "That's a weird metaphor." "You know what I mean." He did. He didn't say so, but he did. They went back inside when the cold won. Lindsay and Emma were at the kitchen table with Margot, the 3 of them in the comfortable territory of women who'd gotten past introductions and were now in the actual conversation, the kind you could hear was good from the doorway without being able to make out the words. Kevin put the kettle on. Nathan checked on Lily, still out, the cat a warm gray shape curved against her legs, and stood in the doorway of the living room for a moment in the dark, watching his daughter sleep in someone else's house with that complete, unself-conscious peace. He thought about what she'd said when he'd asked if he wanted Emma to stay. "You should tell her." 6 years old, with a stick and a chain-link fence, and a directness that cut through every adult complication he'd been carrying. He thought, she was right. He thought, she usually is. The drive home was quiet in the good way. Lily asleep in the back seat before they turned out of Kevin's street, Emma in the passenger seat with her head tipped back slightly, not asleep but resting, watching the neighborhood move past the window. Nathan drove the way he always did, unhurried, familiar with every turn. "Lindsay told me about the seating chart," Emma said. "She told me too. She said she almost put you at table 2. "I know." Emma was quiet for a moment. Outside, the street passed, the corner of Maple and 5th where he'd seen her running 2 months ago, the intersection she crossed every morning, the block where his house sat, and her house was 4 streets over. "What do you think would have happened," Emma said, "if she'd put you at table 2? He thought about it seriously. "I think we would have found each other eventually. You were 4 blocks away for 6 months. It was only a matter of time." "You think? Don't you?" She turned to look at him. In the dark of the car, her expression was soft and direct at the same time. "Yeah," she said, "I do." He pulled into his driveway, cut the engine. They sat for a moment in the quiet, the car ticking as the engine cooled, Lily breathing steadily in the back. "Come in?" he said. Emma looked at him. "It's late." "I know," she smiled. "Yeah?" she said. "Okay." He carried Lily inside. She woke just enough to wrap her arms around his neck and then was out again, and settled her into her bed with the specific blanket arrangement she required. And he stood in her doorway in the dark and thought about Thanksgivings ahead, and the way people accumulate into each other's lives without ceremony, without a single big moment, just the steady accumulation of ordinary days until one day you look around and realize that this exact arrangement of people is what you were always trying to build. He went back downstairs. Emma was in the kitchen, 2 cups of tea on the counter, his jacket on the hook, her shoes beside his by the door. Gerald was on the counter in the precise spot he'd been told not to occupy, unmoved by anything anyone had ever said to him about it. She handed him his cup. He took it, looked at her. "I want to say something," he said. "Okay." "I know I said it before, the love thing, on that Friday night. I remember. I want to say it when it's not in the middle of a conversation about what we were doing. I want to say it just because." He paused. He was not a man who had historically been good at this kind of thing, not because he didn't feel it, but because the language of it had always felt like something that could be gotten wrong. He'd learned somewhere in the last 2 months that with the right person you could say it imperfectly and it would still land true. "I love you, Emma." She looked at him for a moment. Something moved across her face. Not surprised, she knew, she'd known for a while, but the particular quality of someone receiving something they'd wanted and still being moved by actually having it. "I love you too," she said. "I've been in love with you since you were sitting in a barn watching your daughter sleep, and you looked like someone who had figured out what mattered." She paused. "I should have said it better on that Friday. I had a whole thing prepared." "You said it fine." "I said especially you, which was not the most eloquent. It was perfect." She rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. She stepped forward and he closed the distance, and they stood in the kitchen with their tea getting cold on the counter, and Gerald watching them from his forbidden counter position with an expression of absolute indifference. And it was not cinematic or dramatic or particularly composed. It was just 2 people in a kitchen in November, tired from a long good day, exactly where they were supposed to be. Well, here's what Nathan Walker learned in the year that started at table 9. That love is not a reward for having survived hard things. It's not something you earn by suffering enough or waiting long enough or being patient in the right way. It's something that requires only that you be paying attention when it arrives and that you have the honesty to say, yes, this. Even when this is imperfect and complicated and comes with a 6-year-old and a judgmental cat and a fence you fixed 3 months too late. He had spent 2 years being alone and doing it well, and that had been necessary and real, and he did not regret a day of it, because those years had made him someone who knew exactly what kind of life he wanted, someone who had stopped waiting for things to be easier before he let them be good. The harder lesson, the one he was still learning, was this, that the people you love most are not the ones who fill in your empty spaces. Lily didn't do that. Emma didn't do that. What they did was something more complicated. They showed him that the empty spaces he'd been trying to manage and minimize and work around were actually just room for something to grow in. That's a different thing entirely. Emma had her own version of the lesson. She had spent a decade building toward the next job, the next city, the next proof of herself. And she had been good at it, genuinely good, and it had given her things she valued. But building toward something she'd found was a way of never quite arriving. You get good at the motion and forget to put down roots. She'd come back here half by accident and half because some quieter part of her had known she was tired of existing somewhere while doing something else. She'd been looking for a place to actually live. She'd found it. It just happened to include a man she'd known since she was 9 years old and a kid who had strong opinions about names and a house on Crescent Drive where the kitchen always smelled like something being made from scratch. The things you come back to have a way of being, the things you needed all along. Not because they were waiting, because you finally stopped moving long enough to see them. In the spring, Lily's class did a unit on family. The assignment was to draw a picture of the people who lived in your house and bring it in. Nathan found out about this the way he found out about most school assignments, at the last possible minute, when Lily appeared at his elbow on a Thursday evening with a piece of paper and a set of markers and the focused energy of someone with a deadline. "I need to draw my family," she said. "Okay." He looked up from his laptop. "Do you want to do it at the table?" "Yes." She pulled out a chair, set up her markers with organizational precision, looked at the blank paper for a moment. Emma was on the couch, reading. Gerald was on the armchair he'd claimed as his own. The house had that particular evening sound. The refrigerator's hum, the occasional car passing outside, the low-level comfort of people settled in for the night. Lily looked at Nathan, then she looked at Emma. Then she looked at her paper. She drew Nathan first, tall, with the slightly concerned eyebrows he apparently always had according to every drawing she'd done of him. Then herself, smaller, with what appeared to be extremely detailed pigtails. Then Gerald, who was a gray oval with ears and therefore the easiest. Then she drew Emma. She drew her on the other side of Nathan, the four of them in a row. Nathan, Lily, Gerald, Emma, with the kitchen in the background and what appeared to be a pot on the stove, which Nathan recognized as the risotto. She looked at her work, seemed satisfied. "Done," she announced. Nathan looked at the drawing. He looked at the four figures in their row, his daughter's unselfconscious rendering of the people who constituted her world. "Looks good, Lil." Emma had looked up from her book. She was looking at the drawing from across the room. She said nothing for a moment. "Can I see?" Emma asked. Lily took the drawing over to her. Emma looked at it for a few seconds with an expression Nathan couldn't see from where he sat, but he could see her shoulders, and he could see the small way they dropped, like something releasing. "That's Gerald," Lily said, pointing. "I recognize Gerald. He's very oval in real life." "He is," Emma agreed. She looked up at Lily. Her voice was even, but Nathan had learned to hear what was underneath evenness by now. "This is really good." Lily accepted this with the grace of a professional. She retrieved her drawing, rolled it carefully so it wouldn't crease, and went upstairs to put it in her backpack. Nathan and Emma looked at each other across the room. There was nothing to say. They both knew what had just happened. The small, total, unceremonious way a child had drawn the shape of a family, put four people in a row in front of a kitchen, and not questioned a single thing about it. Not because she'd been told to, because it was simply what was true. He thought about Kevin's wedding. He thought about the seating chart disaster and Table 9 and Patricia herding people onto the dance floor and a slow song and 30 seconds into it thinking, "I'm in trouble." He thought about how the smallest hinges hold the heaviest doors. Emma was still looking at him. The book was closed on her lap. Gerald was asleep in his armchair. Outside, spring was working its way back into the neighborhood. The rose bush by Emma's front porch had started doing something again. And the corner streetlight held its steady light every night without flickering, and Lily's succulent Terrence was thriving on the kitchen windowsill in the particular stubborn way of things that had simply decided to keep going. "Hey," Emma said. "Hey. I'm glad I moved back." "I know. I'm glad about the seating chart." "Me too." She smiled, the full crooked one, the left side more than the right, the one that had been in the world since she was 9 years old, and which he now knew was the last thing he wanted to see before he fell asleep, and the first thing he wanted to see when he woke up, not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. Some stories don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with music or fanfare or a clean beginning. They start with a last-minute seating change and a table near the exit, and an AC unit that rattles every 40 seconds, and they build the way real things build. Slowly, imperfectly, through ordinary days and difficult conversations and the gradual unspoken accumulation of trust. And if you're paying attention, if you're willing to say the true thing and sit with the hard thing and stay for the ordinary thing, you get to keep them. That's the whole deal. That's every bit of it.